Good day, grade 5. Hope this history lesson finds you well, safe, and at home. Today's lesson is on crops and the livestock that the early farmers kept. It's just a PowerPoint lesson. We are doing our best to lessen the workload, and so I just ask you to listen and watch the PowerPoint and nothing else for this week's lesson. As you have already learnt, the early farmers changed the landscape where they lived. They chopped down trees and tall grass, which they burnt to fertilize the soil. This was known as the slash and burn method. Remember that the sand didn't change the landscape, the koi changed very little, but the farmers had to clear it completely for them to plant their crops. The farmers cleared the area for the women to plant their crops. I am sure you will agree that the woman had a lot to do. Brew beer, make food, look after children, and even plant the crops. Remember, grade 5, that the area they chose would have been very carefully chosen to have the correct fertile soil, summer rainfall, and a source of water like a river nearby. They helped each other clear plots, arranging communal work parties, and all worked well together for their kraal. Remember, the farmers stayed in an area for a long time so they could plant crops, build huts, and their kraals. Remember that they would plant their crops, then they would have to grow, and then only be harvested a good 6 months later. And so they had to settle there for a while. The kraals were built inside the homestead and were made out of stones collected from the areas and packed together. The farmer herds were much bigger than the koi herds. The cattle belonged to an individual, but the land belonged to the community. This was quite an important point because no one owned the land. You could own a cow, but you couldn't own the land. It was there for everybody to use. The farmers grew all sorts of crops, mainly hardy ones, such as the squashes and pumpkins, but in the line of grains, the two types of grains they grew the most was sorghum and millet. The picture is an example of millet. The next slide is an example of sorghum. You got millet in red millet and white millet. These grains could be ground into a powder to make like bread or porridge or beer. It was only after the Europeans arrived in the 1500s that the early farmers were introduced to wheat and maize. We eat bread made from wheat and porridge made from maize. Maize in Afrikaans is mielies, and we had mieliemeal at SOS. These grains were stored in baskets above the ground or underground in pits. The underground method was especially successful in times of raids where baddies would come and steal their grain, but if it was hidden underground, nobody knew where it was, except the rightful owner. Early farmers were subsistence farmers. This meant that they only grew enough to feed themselves. If the harvest was very good, they could barter with their neighbors or with other family groups. Early farmers also grew fruit and vegetables, and on a smaller scale they kept other animals such as chicken, sheep and goats. Eggs, milk and meat from these animals were an important part of their diet. And that is the end of your history PowerPoint presentation. Hope to see you all this week. Lots of love, Mrs. Spencer. Bye.